Welcome back to Seeking the Truth About the Sword of Truth. My name is Tom, and I'll be your guide. In this episode, we're studying Chapter 2 of Wizard's First Rule. In the previous episode, we covered the introduction of several characters, as well as the literary techniques Goodkind used to spark a connection with them so the readers would be interested in how those characters would face the challenges unfolding around them. Please note that these episodes contain heavy spoilers, not just for this chapter, but for future chapters, and even books in the series. If you haven't read the series yet and intend to, I'd encourage you to read the books first, and then come back and see what I think about them. Spoiler alert, I really like them. We begin the chapter near Hawker's Trail with Richard as he tries to process the information of seeing a lone female traveler being stalked by 4 men. The author puts a clever spin on a well-known trope of psychology to show Richard's process of accepting difficult information, and gives us foreshadowing about a critical character trait that he is missing at this point in his character development. The 5 stages of grief is a simplified version of the stages people go through when handling difficult information. The order of the 5 stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And in the span of the first 3 paragraphs of the chapter, we see 4 of those 5 stages on display, with the notable absence of the second stage, anger. Stage 1, denial. He couldn't be sure they were even stalking her. Stage 2, anger, is noticeably missing. This comes into play in subsequent chapters when it's revealed that Richard goes out of his way to keep his anger hidden and under tight control. Later, Zed explains to him that denying his anger is an irrational condemnation of a neutral force that completely sidesteps the personal responsibility that comes along with using that force responsibly. This reluctance to use a certain type of power for fear of abuse of that power is a theme that comes up again and again in this series. Richard skips straight from Stage 1 to Stage 3, bargaining. He bargains with himself as he asks what business of it is his anyways, and what could one man do without a weapon? This point creates an excellent anchor for where Richard is right now in his character development, and over the next 4 novels we see a stunning reversal of his thought process, because here he wonders what he can do without a weapon, and when he's told in Temple of the Winds you don't even have a weapon, his only response is, I am the weapon. Stage 4 is depression, when he thinks to himself, what chance does the woman have? Finally, Stage 5 is acceptance, where he pushes past that and readies himself for action. At this point, even though he doesn't have a solid plan, the decision has been made. This is another technique the author uses to create a bond with the character. While it would seem logical that Richard might justify the decision instantly to help the woman, because it's the right thing to do, that isn't how normal people think or behave, and it certainly isn't how most of the readers would behave in that situation. By putting in the time to show a realistic process of thought, instead of skipping to the end, we're pulled towards the character because he thinks the way we think. He has a process for taking in information and analyzing it before he's able to make a decision, just like most of us. Now we begin the next story circle for Richard. This is another character arc for Richard to travel so we can continue the process of bonding with him. Richard, the hero, is given the call to adventure when he sees the woman in trouble and decides to help. Now we begin the next story circle for Richard. This is another character arc for Richard to travel so that we can continue to process bonding with him. Richard, the hero, is given a call to adventure when he sees the woman in trouble and decides to help. Now he has something that he wants and sets out into an unfamiliar situation. In this instance, the unfamiliar situation isn't the trails because he knows them. The unfamiliar situation is he can travel those trails in the amount of time that he has before he's too late. Immediately on the heels of introducing this story circle, the arc of making it to the woman in time, the author throws out a second hook for the next story circle along with the beginning of this one. Richard goes through his plan of how he will help them both escape, along with his reasoning of why he thinks that plan will work, but then cuts back to him running through the forest at top speed because his plan won't be good for anything if he can't make it there in time. The sprint through the forest covers Richard adapting to the unfamiliar setting of needing to travel these trails at high speed, including the risk of missing the trail entirely due to how easy it would be. We are then given the first of several foreshadowings about the thorn in Richard's hand giving him trouble. Within a few minutes of physical exertion, we see the cool morning turn into a choking heat. Richard passes off the fatigue as exertion. Richard gets what he was searching for when he finds the cutoff and also sees a lack of tracks. That means he's made it there in time. He pays a heavy price for his exertion by having a painful stitch in his side. He returns to his zone of comfort, but is changed by the worry about not being able to convince the woman to come with him, and immediately continues from this starting point into the second story circle of needing to convince her to come along with him. We're given a second and slightly stronger foreshadowing of the bite in his hand now, red and throbbing painfully, and a third foreshadowing in the next paragraph when Richard gets waves of heat rolling off his body. Next, we are formally introduced to the woman on the trail, and her name is withheld for now. To Richard, the first impression she makes is a powerful one. The author spends a full paragraph painting a picture of her as a self-reliant, beautiful woman, prepared for the rigors of travel with practical choices of travel gear on display. The next paragraph includes another phrase that struck me. The connection was so strong it drained his sense of self. He felt that he had always known her and that her needs were his needs. It then goes on to say that in his mind, he said he was there to help her, and he meant it more than any thought he had ever had before. This phrase accomplishes a lot. First, it completes the story circle of Richard needing to convince her that he is there to help. He needs to convince her that he is not a threat. He meets her gaze and tries to appear non-threatening. He adapts to the unknown scrutiny of her gaze. He gets what he wants when she relents her gaze and relaxes. He pays the heavy price of change when he discovers a strong but previously unknown bond to her, and then returns back to where he was, having grown. The story circle completes here, and not later on, where they discuss how he plans to help her. This sounds like a potential foreshadowing to information that is revealed throughout the next 10 books, when it is shown that the first wizard Baracus was responsible for Richard being given the power that he has, so he could balance the threats of Darkenrahl and Jagang. Later in this book, and many times throughout other novels, Richard shows the unique ability to successfully navigate prophecy with the help of his intuition and his gift. Because of the way the author chooses to phrase this, with words that describe an overwhelming pull, this feels like an outside force apart from Richard's conscious mind, and feels like an example of Richard's dormant gift reinforcing how important this woman is. And if you look at Cailin's reaction of scrutiny, Richard telling her first in his mind that he wanted to help her, and meaning it more than he had ever meant anything, that too feels like it could be a minor manifestation of the gift. This explanation would also be corroborated by Verna's explanation to Richard at the Mud People's village in Stone of Tears, chapter 9, about how they were able to find him when she says, "Those with the gift have some use of it throughout their life, in little ways, even though it lies dormant." Much like the whispers in his mind in chapter 1, I can't say for sure if this is another manifestation of his gift for prophecy. I'm more inclined to believe his gift of prophecy pushing him to bond with her, and less inclined to believe he passively injected a sense of calm into the situation. But both points could be argued with enough evidence to make a reasonable case for each. The author uses a technique to follow up this show of success with a shot of humility that from this point on I will refer to as the Clark Kent effect. While disguised as Clark Kent, Superman would often go out of his way to make Clark appear non-threatening. He would often do so by being clumsy, constantly running late, and in addition to establishing a pattern of lovable unreliability, it also worked to put those around him at ease. Richard adopts the Clark Kent effect when he tries to show the woman where he was watching her, and only succeeds in pointing at a group of trees that make seeing what he was talking about impossible. This creates a bond to Richard by scratching the almost universal itch that people have with their frustration to communicate. We know the right words and feelings, but sometimes when we try to convey them, we're powerless to make the other person see the world through our own eyes. We all run into this every day, and the momentary display of impotence further humanizes Richard as a fallible character who many times has to try more than once to achieve his goal. The woman shows no emotion, which is a foreshadowing that we will later learn refers to something called a confessor's face. And that's a concept that is expanded upon in later parts of the series. But for now, Richard and the reader don't know her well enough to see beyond what she intends to show. It is the color draining from her face at the mention of men following her that betrays her fear, but not her expression. After making it clear to Richard that there's a significant risk that comes with his offer to help her, she accepts his offer and agrees with Richard's plan to lead them down a different trail while hiding their tracks, trying to get to safety before the men realize they chose the wrong trail. In the next few pages, notice the author's change in tone from using tension-building words such as terror, weapon, tight, narrow, into more relaxing words like open view, patches of sunlight, very quiet, very peaceful. Goodkind begins to cultivate a sense of peace and serenity that many people who commune with nature on a regular basis find there. Through Richard, the author shares the danger therein of an echo and snapping twigs giving away their location. An echo is a reflection of sound that arrives at a listener with a delay after the direct sound. In Australia, about 30 miles west of Sydney, the Blue Mountains have locations named for and associated with naturally occurring echoes. This is further referenced in Greek lore, which would often create myths to explain natural phenomena. Echo is the name of a mountain nymph whose ability to speak was cursed, so she can only repeat the last words anyone spoke to her. For scientific realism, the section talking about echoes giving away their position reads an A+ grade. The author gives us another quick story circle on their journey through the moss-covered rocks. The protagonists need to move quickly and silently, and cannot do so while traveling normally. They leave their comfort zone, more the woman than Richard, adapt to the unfamiliar setting of hopping from rock to rock, careful of the threat of slipping on the moss and giving away their position. They adapt to the situation by helping each other. The price is paid from the woman who had to give up her control and put her faith in Richard. They get what they want when they transition from the area littered with twigs hidden under dead leaves, and the change occurs as the woman starts to warm up to Richard by smiling. They continue climbing, and Richard is given a clue from her boots that whoever this person is, she's wearing the kind of boots used by someone who is used to traveling. After they leave the cover of the forest, they need to travel across ledges in the rock, leaving them in plain view. Richard is confident that all of his precautions have paid off, and they have succeeded in throwing the 4 men off their trail. We are given another mention of Richard's hand making him feel like he needs a rest, and this is followed up by a mention of the day becoming warm for this late in the year. Since Goodkind usually creates his narration from the perspective of the main character of the scene, this could be an example of an unreliable narrator, where the character believes that it is warm for this late in the year, but really he's just experiencing more heat due to the bite in his hand. We're introduced to the presence of a strange snake-like cloud that has been visible in the sky for the last day or two, and Richard reminds himself to mention it to Zed, who is a cloud reader of enough authority that Richard fears an hour-long lecture on the importance of clouds if he fails to mention it to him. Following a part of the trail that leads them along a cliffed wall, we start to see a transition in tone away from the open descriptions of serene nature, and back to the tension-building language mentioned earlier in the chapter. Richard notices a line of dead trees near the boundary that have been killed by the vine. The passage becomes narrow and treacherous, with boulder fields several hundred feet below. The transition is abrupt, and their forward progress is stopped by 2 of the men following them, and their retreat is blocked by 2 of the men climbing down on ropes to land on the path behind them. Richard is unable to fathom how they were able to follow them. As a student of the series for this section, I don't have a strong sense of how those men were able to catch up to them either, given Richard's skill at tracking and traveling as a woods guide. The series goes out of its way several times to establish Richard's expert level of skill for tracking and traveling. The question of their ability and method of catching up to them is never explored any further. The only explanation that seems plausible given the information provided is that Richard underestimated the level of skill these men following him had, and either did not have the time or feel a need to do more of the things that the later novels establish he is capable of. Quads are described as elite-level troops specifically put together to track and kill confessors. The most plausible explanation is that they are also expert-level trackers, and Richard made an assumption about their skill level that was not accurate. Next, we run into phrases that Terry likes to use when he's describing the men who are adversaries of the protagonists, much bigger than they are and heavily muscled. There's a lot of symbolism built into these types of descriptions that I will be covering in much greater detail in future episodes. The men are described as blonde-haired and handsome. Many readers feel that parallels can be drawn between Daharan citizens and those of German heritage. This is also illustrated by giving Daharan's German accents in several of the audio novels. If one was going to support that position, then the closest parallel I could find are mentions by Hans F.K. Gunther, a German scientist, who classifies a Phalaean subtype of the Aryan race. Rosen Iliev, who studied this subsection of German heritage, listed many features common to Phalaeans that mimic many of the descriptions used to describe Daharans. Tall, great bone width, blonde hair, blue or gray eyes, massive jaws, strong necks. Unless stated otherwise, the words of the text will supersede any information gathered from outside the novels, as authors often use things they are familiar with as a starting off point, before transforming those things into something new and different to suit the needs of their own creativity and storytelling. The author takes the opportunity to give us another relatable bond with Richard. When faced with his own mortality, we see him go through the 5 stages of grief again. Denial. He's never been in this situation before. He'd always managed to avoid trouble. This time it does mention the second step of anger, but only immediately to dismiss it as something he never allows himself to use. Bargaining is when he goes down the list of being persuasive enough or strong enough to diffuse a difficult situation. Depression, when he wishes he could walk away right now. And then acceptance, when he looks at the woman and decides not to leave her. She asks that he not let them come at her all at the same time, and Richard is given the chance to walk away, which he does not take. And the 4 men attack. There's a clap of impact described as thunder with no sound that causes Richard to feel a sharp pain in every joint in his body. The Committee on Gulf War and Health Study on the long-term effects of blast exposure lists a myriad of physical effects associated with shock waves created from explosives. Among the list of those health effects, often associated with more powerful shock waves than the ones seen here, is the acute inflammation of joints. It is listed as one of the lesser hazards. While at first it might seem careless for the assassin to take his attention from Richard, he has information the reader does not. He knows what that shock wave means and becomes momentarily distracted by the sharp escalation of danger for him. He knows that someone who is just as skilled and deadly as he is now using his array of deadly weapons to fight on the side of the men and women. Richard leans against the cliff wall and kicks the man out into the air, where he falls to his death. Richard sees one of the men near the woman cut and bleeding falling through the air. The leader runs past Richard using a palm strike to try and incapacitate him, intent instead on meeting the real threat of the trained and armed elite operative. Richard grabs his wrist to try and stop him. The man spins around to kill Richard, and the last man runs his leader through the stomach with a sword, driving both of them off the pass and into the rocky ground below. With the fight over, Richard notices the woman appears drained, mentioning but not explaining something closely tied to what just happened. Introductions are made, and we learn Richard's full name is Richard Cypher. The woman utters the first instance of an often repeated phrase about Richard being a very rare person. In this instance, she's referring to his loyalty. Finally, the woman, with an obvious avoidance of her official title, introduces herself as Kaylin M. Nell. They both enjoy a moment of bonding after a shared, stressful event. Bernie Brown, professor at University of Houston Graduate City College of Social Work and expert in the field of social connection, explains that vulnerability is a core ingredient of social bonding. War is one of the greatest stressors anyone could ever encounter, yet it often leads to deep human friendships and incredible acts of heroism and sacrifice for one another. This is an illustration of that psychological bonding where they appear to warm up to each other quite a bit, especially Richard. Mentally, Richard organizes a timeline of events and then tries to ask her to help him fill in the blanks of how they're still alive, and Kaylin deflects the question. She does share with him that she's never had a friend before except her sister. Using a description of the scenic view as a transition, the author gives us more mystery about the boundary. People won't go there, old people won't talk about it, and those who do go there die. And those who go there, it's often said to forfeit your soul along with your life. Richard presses the issue as she tells him that it was the good spirits, which he knows is a lie, but he remembers the lessons his father taught him about respecting another person's right to keep secrets, and then foreshadows that Richard is the keeper of secrets of his own, and he's beginning to feel like those secrets might be linked to his father's murder. Richard remembers how much his hand hurts, and how hungry he is, and his stomach hurts from where he got hit. Remembering basic sensations from the body is consistent with the biology of what happens when adrenaline wears off. It makes perfect sense to reference that in this scenario. Richard asks Kaylin about the men trying to kill her, and she identifies them as a quad, a group of men sent to kill people. She resumes the emotionless face that she was wearing when they first met to talk about it, demonstrating but not explaining one of her core character traits. We learn that Kaylin traveled through the boundary from the Midlands to get here. We're then formally introduced to the concept of the Midlands as a land of magic separated from Westland, a land sealed away behind an impenetrable barrier. The Chapter 2 cliffhanger is nowhere near as brutal as the first chapter, but it does ask the reader to ponder several different things without offering any answers to them. We learn that the boundary wasn't always there. We learn about a new land with different rules that might seem impossible. We learn that the safety of the separation of the boundary has provided Richard for all of his life somehow is not as absolute as he had once believed it to be. It's time for the official #1 quote from Seeking the Truth about the Sword of Truth in Wizard's First Rule, Chapter 2. Please note that the views and opinions of what the official number one quote from this chapter is may differ from the views and opinions expressed by you about what your number one favorite quote for this chapter is. In the event that your number one quote is different from the one mentioned here, please list your candidate for number one quote in the comments below. And the official number one quote is, "If Richard failed to report his sighting, he would have to endure an hour-long lecture on the significance of clouds." In the next chapter, we'll cover Richard and Kaylin's interactions with Michael and get a deeper view into the Cipher family dynamic. I'd like to end this episode of Seeking the Truth about the Sword of Truth with another story of mine from how Terry Goodkind has positively impacted my life. I had often sensed that there were things I felt about the world that could not explain. I did not have the right words to voice those. And I didn't learn until much later that was because the way that I felt was not what was commonly accepted by many people. Words were finally put to what I had felt. I felt like my life was mine to live, and that was mine alone, and it was my job to rise up and live it. And that makes the choice that we make when we decide to give parts of our lives to other people meaningful. And that was his point in the books as well. Sacrifice can't have meaning without consent. And the absolute faith that we have that consent for our lives is a great comfort to me. And I hope it is to you as well. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you feel like you've gotten something of value from this video, please like and subscribe to this channel for me, and share that value you've gotten from this video with those you think might enjoy it. If those feelings aren't there yet, I invite you to come back for the next episode and give me a chance to try and change your mind. Thank you for watching. My name is Tom, and I have been your guide. This has been Seeking the Truth about the Sword of Truth. Come join me next time while I'm seeking these truths, and you can become a seeker of those truths as well. Thank you, and I hope to see you again.